Welcome to another Northern Monkey's Datasheet review, where we're taking a look at the Gladiator Lancer for Codex Space Marines. So in this video we're going to talk about the relatively new Gladiator Grav tank, the way that the Lancer works, its strengths and its weaknesses, and what detachments you can use to get the most out of it. So clocking in at 160 points, the Gladiator Lancer is just a pure anti-tank piece for your Space Marine army. It's got a move of 10, so it's reasonably fast, even with having to pivot around ruins. It's only toughness 10 and a 3+ armor save, which is what makes this thing a little more on the fragile side for its points. It does have 12 wounds though, which is quite nice. However, I think you really have to consider that while this thing might die if your opponent puts any serious amount of anti-tank into it, it seriously pays for itself in just how devastating its shooting can be, especially in the right circumstances. It also has a surprising number of little shots. If your opponent's pushed up some kind of unit into your backfield, score some kind of secondary objective, you're going to be able to shred those with a volley of storm bolters, Icarus rocket pods, iron hail stubbers. You get about 12 shots out of this thing at a medium range. So that's very, very nice. And it does have the smoke keyword, but something that's important to remember with all these Gladiator tanks. It just makes them a little bit more durable, especially into ballistic skill 4+ armies, where you can really leverage that -1 to hit from the smoke stratagem. But what you're really paying for with this tank is the laser destroyer. 2 shots that hit on 3s, strength 14, AP 4, and a whopping D6 +3 damage. This is just an excellent gun. And now you see things like this in other armies. You've got the Tau Railgun, the Lehman Rush Vanquisher. It's kind of scary, low number of shots but high damage guns. The thing that makes the Lancer better than a lot of these is its rule, Aquilon Optics. Each time you select this mod to shoot, it gets to reroll a hit roll, and a wound roll, and a damage roll. This is just incredibly strong. You've only got 2 shots. Hitting on 3s, you're likely, maybe you miss one, well you get to reroll it. You're going to be wounding almost everything in the game on 3s. You failed to one of those, you get to reroll it. Suddenly your opponent's got to make 2 AP4 saves, which is going to reduce even the toughest kind of enemies down to a 5+ save. If they fail both of those, the average damage coming out of this thing is 13 wounds. It's a lot of damage you can do to a vehicle. And don't forget, you can always re-roll that. The D6 +3, while it's got a good baseline, it's still very, very variable. 4 versus 9 damage. It's a big deal. So just being able to be like, I rolled like a 4 and a 2 on my damage roll, and your opponent's going to end up with 2 wounds left. Well, I'm just going to take a risk, and on a 4+, I'm going to re-roll that and maybe kill an enemy tank. And I think that's what truly makes this unit great, is just that reliability. Just being able to sort of take those risks and just make sure that, yes, I'm going to try my best to absolutely one-shot this important enemy vehicle, and then your opponent still has to deal with a big tank. That while 160 points is expensive, it's not the biggest thing in the world. And of course, it's worth mentioning with Space Marines, you don't need the Oath of Moment to really get the most out of this unit. It's good enough on its own to just, with those rerolls, you're always going to get this reliable amount of damage out of it. So in terms of detachments that benefit the Gladiator Lancer, the obvious home for any vehicle equals the Ironstorm spearhead. This is extra good for the Lancer for a few reasons. First off, the detachment rule. Now you might think there's a bit of a counter synergy here, since the detachment rule allows for rerolls on the hit or the wound or the damage. This might be like, why would I need that if I've already got the rerolls on the Lancer? But this just makes the Lancer even more efficient. You're just going to avoid those edge cases where it's like, I rolled a 1 and a 2 on my hit roll, and I can only reroll one of those with the vehicle's own ability. So it is actually very good, and it will come up a surprising amount. On top of that, if you have a Techmarine hanging out nearby the Lancer, not only can he have it hit on 2s and heal it, he can have the target augury web enhancement. It really helps with the Lancer's slightly more fragile profile, just by being able to blanket damage of anything that gets through to it. And there's some seriously crazy damage numbers flying around out there between Knights with their volcano lances, Fugan with his big melter pike. There's definitely things to watch out for that could potentially just one tap the Gladiator Lancer. So being able to blank that damage and just maybe survive on a few wounds and then get healed up by the Techmarine, really good. And of course, a lot of the things that are going to be trying to kill your tanks are enemy tanks, which the Lancer loves shooting at. So if your opponent shoots at the Lancer and doesn't quite kill it, you can use the power of the Machine Spirit stratagem to get the Lancer to fire back and potentially bring the Lancer out, kill something, It gets shot, survives on a few wounds, fires back thanks to all its rerolls that it gets. It blasts another thing, and suddenly not only is your Lancer still alive, but you've just traded 2 for 1 with your opponent. Very, very strong. Now, even though it's cost 2 command points, I do think it is worth talking about the Lancer and Mercy's weakness stratagem. Now, this is a kind of a strange one. You essentially, if you're shooting at an enemy that is below starting strength, you get sustained hits on your gun, and then 5 score a critical hit as well. So basically you'd be getting those sustained hits on 5 pluses. Now this is really, really good. You can sort of weaken enemy vehicles in a lot of different ways with Space Marines. Almost everything has the grenades keyword. So if you're really looking to finish off a big, tough enemy unit, chuck a grenade at them, do maybe 3 mortal wounds, and then you pop the Mercy's weakness stratagem on your Lancer. And you're hitting on 3s anyway. You can be re-rolling, maybe even hitting on 2s thanks to a Techmarine. And you can just be like, yeah, I'm going to fire these 2 shots. Oh, I'm scoring like 3 or 4 hits every time. Just really, really good. And at that point, you're one-shotting like the bigger vehicles. You're doing serious damage into knights. And it's just a really, really good thing to think about and have in your back pocket if you're like, yeah, I really, really want to up the damage on this Lancer that I have available to me right now. Now, it's certainly worth saying that despite all those synergies, Ironstorm isn't the only place for the Lancer. I think it can go in almost anything because it's so independent with those Aquilon optics and the way it works. You just kind of don't have to think about it. You see people with Blood Angels and all sorts of things running the Lancer. So it's got that adaptability to just be able to be slotted into any Space Marine force to provide more anti-tank firepower. But there's still some good synergies in stuff like Gladius. This gives the Gladiator access to advance, fall back and shoot, which can really help with its mobility, really help stopping it get tied up and fly backwards out of the harm's way, which is really, really strong for it. And on top of that, the Storm of Fire stratagem. If you're in the Devastator doctrine, which lets the Gladiator advance and shoot, you can then give it Storm of Fire, which would bring it up to a mighty AP5 ignores cover. So almost nothing in the game gets an armor save versus this. Even a Redemptor Dreadnought sat behind a ruin, you're still going to be able to get straight through its armor save. And again, it's all about making the Gladiator so efficient that it's just going to one-shot any target, which I think is worth doing with this Storm of Fire stratagem. On top of that, the new hotness, the Shadowmark Talon detachment. This is really, really strong. However, it can somewhat be lacking in sort of ability to punch up. I think the Gladiator, if you've not got those Centurion Devastators or you don't want to invest in them at the moment, I think the Gladiator can be a reasonable fill-in for them. It doesn't quite have all the synergies with the detachment, but it's still good. It's still solid and independent on its own. It enjoys the detachment rule, giving it -1 to hit and cover if your opponent's shooting at a long range. The Gladiator likes to try and snipe down big long sight lines, so it's generally going to be able to benefit from this detachment rule when your opponent shoots back at it, so that helps with its durability. And the detachment now comes with a fall back and shoot stratagem, which is very, very good for the Gladiator, because again, it doesn't like being tied up. I think it's always worth talking about when discussing the Gladiator, the Ballistus Dreadnought. The Ballistus fulfills a very, very similar role to the Gladiator. That kind of long-ranged, independent, anti-tank shooting. I've got another video all about the Ballistus if you want to check that out. But it versus the Gladiator is a very interesting question in 10th edition. Now, their points have generally not quite been as equal as they are right now. The Ballistus was at one point down to something ridiculous like 130, so a lot cheaper than the Gladiator, but it's since knocked up and up in points. And it kind of now you leave yourself at a strange decision here as a Space Marine player. The Ballistus is a little bit more durable thanks to its 2-up armor save. It can kind of use the pivot rules to get around buildings a bit more easier, and just generally it has a bit more of a volume in its shots, if a lot less damage and consistency overall. So which one's better? It's hard to say. Right now, I still perhaps favour the Ballistus, but that might just be an aesthetics kind of thing that I'm letting bias my judgment. But this is always worth thinking about when you're considering getting a Gladiator Lancer for your force. Is it better than the Ballistus? Because they're so similar in the way that they operate. The last thing I want to talk about is, do you want a Techmarine to go with a Gladiator? Techmarine's only 55 points to have him hanging about. I think this is quite good, but there's a few downsides to it. For one, the Gladiator already has those built-in rerolls, so the +1 to hit that the Techmarine gives it isn't so valuable. Now, being able to repair the Gladiator, that is quite nice. You can take it out of being bracketed. if it's wounded that badly. And generally, you're going to be able to get benefit out of the Techmarine all game if the Gladiator survives, because it's a long range firing piece. The Techmarine is going to be kept safe by his lone operative ability. So it might be quite good to have him hanging out. However, it's going to be some matchups where this is really good, and some matchups where this is quite bad, because your opponent might just be able to one-shot the Gladiator tank, and then your Techmarine is just stood there like, oh, I guess I'm going to run off and spend the next 2 turns trying to get into the fight here. So yeah, it's a tricky one to me. I do kind of like the Techmarines hanging out in the backfield. You know, they have a surprising melee punch, which can catch some enemies off guard. You know, they brought some small squad back there to harass your vehicles, and it's like, well, the Techmarine's going to run in and fight that entire squad on his own now. And even just tying them up with his 2-up armor save is valuable. So do you want a Techmarine with a Gladiator? I'm going to say no, because it just sort of in many ways adds to the price point of the Gladiator, and it's already a little expensive. So thanks for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. We try and make content like this every week. Getting close to 500 subs, which is nice. Really still enjoying making these videos. It's kind of making me reflect on Space Marines themselves, and get a little bit more excited about them, you know. Like, there's so many armies in 40k now that are cool to look at the rules and play around with. But Space Marines, they are, you know, there's a reason they're so popular. They're very, very cool. And I'm excited to see the new Iron Hands character come out. I'm looking forward to seeing if what the new detachment rework is for him. Should be really good. Definitely want to make a video about that.